Heyo, Adam Saxton with the Power BI product team, and I'm so happy you were able to join us for this session, which is all about gaining insights into usage and performance of Power BI. Gaining insights is so important when we think about understanding what's happening from an administrative perspective or governance perspective, and being able to adapt to those items depending on what's happening. Maybe we need more licenses. Maybe adoption's going through the roof. Maybe we need to figure out a better approach to help reduce cost, whether that's looking at an E5 license from an Office 365 side, whether that's looking at premium, whether we need to scale up, or maybe, hey, can we scale back because we're just not using it in the way that we thought we were. So how do we get those insights and how do we know what's going on? The other thing we're going to look at in this session is looking at different aspects, even from an end user perspective, or like at the workspace level. So what options do we have there? And then what options do we have from an entire tenant perspective, from an administration side of the house? When we think about end users or consumers of Power BI reports, what are some things that we can think about from an insight perspective that they can discern from what they're looking at? There are a couple of items that are here. One big item is sensitivity labels inside of Power BI. Now, with sensitivity labels inside of Power BI, the owners of the content can apply these sensitivity labels inside of Power BI. This is assuming that sensitivity labels have been enabled for the tenant, and also that you have configured those labels that are outside of Power BI itself. So these are items that apply to all of your tenants. So on the Office 365 and the Azure side of this, using the Microsoft Information Protection. So these labels can be applied that are used throughout your organization, and this protection extends for the policies for Excel and other Office products that enable those labels as well. It can also be used inside of like Adobe PDF files. And then the usage of those items can also be viewed at from a tenant perspective with inside of the Power BI admin portal. The awesome thing about these sensitivity labels, if we ended up going into a report where this sensitivity label was defined, then you could actually, when you go to export that data, that would carry through to Excel documents itself, which is amazing. I mentioned that admins are capable of actually seeing what's being used from the sensitive data perspective. So within inside of the admin portal, there is an area called protection metrics where you can actually go get a high level report of the content with inside of your tenant and where those labels have been assigned to that content. And then this activity is further logged within inside of the Power BI audit log. If you want to take this a step further, admins can also continue to investigate inside of the Microsoft Cloud App Security portal using that Power BI admin user. Now, when using these items like Microsoft Cloud App Security and the Microsoft Information Protection, be aware that there may be additional licensing and cost outside of Power BI to enable this inside of your organization. So just be aware of that. All right, let's take a look at some things that are coming down the pipeline for these particular items. So first off, we do have labels that are available inside of the Power BI service, but now labels will also be able to be applied directly inside of Power BI desktop. That means that these labels encryption settings will be applied directly to the Power BI desktop file, and there's a preview that's coming later this year. So with inside of Power BI desktop, you'll actually be able to apply that label directly from the toolbar and see the labels that are actually available with inside of your organization. And like I said, that'll be applied to the desktop file, and you'll be able to see that inside of Power BI desktop directly, and then publish that to the actual Power BI service. So when you pick your workspace, that will get published successfully. And when you go to the Power BI service, then you'll actually see that label applied to the data set and the report. Going into that report, we'll also further be able to extend that, like I said before, with the Excel file. So when we go to export that data to Excel, the Excel file will also inherit that label that you applied directly inside of Power BI desktop. Another item that will be coming is end-to-end classification. And so with end-to-end classification, your label inheritance could be applied from a data source on the Azure Synapse analytics side. So we could apply this to a particular column, and when that gets triggered or used with inside of Power BI desktop and Power BI itself, these labels will be applied across the board. So let's actually look at, from a Synapse perspective, we can apply these labels from a column perspective or a schema perspective inside of Azure Synapse Analytics. And when we go ahead and look at a data source that's actually, or a data set that's pulling from that data source, and we go and refresh that inside of the Power BI service, that will pick up that sensitivity label and it will be used with inside of Power BI at that point. We can then see that this is carried through to the reports and then to the associated dashboards that are also referencing those reports. And when we go ahead and open up that report and we go look at the information, that will also be applied. If, for say, we pull in that data set into Microsoft Excel, then that security label will also be applied to the Excel document that's pulling from that data set, which is inheriting from the Azure Synapse Analytics source data itself. So that label carries through from an end-to-end perspective. Another item that can be helpful for end users to understand and gain insights about the data they're using are endorsements. And so you can apply those endorsements on data sets and data flows, and this will also be coming for dashboards and reports as well. So you can mark them as certified or promoted, and your end users will know, like if it's a certified report or data set, this is the blessed item for the organization itself. All right, let's move on to actually look at how do we gain insights about usage and more. And so when we talk about usage and gaining insights from that, really what we're talking about is from an administrative perspective, who's using my reports, who's actually using the data, from where is it being located at, maybe what are the most popular ones, what's the performance, all of those types of items are about usage, whether that be for governance reasons or just understanding of adoption. And so to start off with looking at what we have available today, let's start with workspace usage metrics. And so this is a given report where you can look at and see who's actually using the report in question. Where is it being used from? So is it coming from the portal? Is it being used from an app directly from the workspace? Is it from the mobile app? What are the performance implications of it compared with other reports in my workspace? This is something that's available at the workspace level for admins and members, where they can go ahead and look at what's actually happening. This data has a 30-day sliding window. So as long as you're within that window, you can see this information over that period of time. As of the recording of this, the image that I'm showing is actually the workspace metrics that are in preview. So these are the new metrics reports, and I'll circle back on this in a little bit. The other item that we have is the Premium Capacity Metrics app. So this Capacity Metrics app is just a way for you to understand what's happening with your premium capacity. The information that's in this app is a 7-day sliding window. And so you can't go past that as it is today. So this will give you insights into all aspects of that premium capacity. So whether it's refreshing of data sets, if it's about the AI information, paginated reports, all of that information is in this app that you can use to decipher what's going on from both memories and vCore utilization, and just see potentially where the bottlenecks are to help troubleshoot related issues. This is available for Power BI admins as well as capacity administrators. Then you can go in and install this app and start looking at the data. All right, past that, let's look at the big item for administrators, and that is the actual audit log or the activity log. Now, one thing, depending on how you're actually looking at the audit log, there may be some additional licensing that may be required. For example, if you're using the Exchange Online PowerShell commandlets to extract it, those may require additional permissions and whatnot. The actual audit log itself, to get to that from the Security and Compliance Center, you have to be an Office 365 global administrator by default. Also, the audit logs for a given tenant are disabled by default. So if you have a new tenant or organization, you may need to go enable that for it to start capturing data. The actual audit log itself also includes a lot of data that's beyond just Power BI. So this is your entire organization itself, regardless of, for what services you're using on the Office 365 side. So that may be Exchange Online, maybe SharePoint, maybe Power BI, maybe something else. There are different ways to look at this. So I mentioned the audit log searching that's within inside of the Security and Compliance Center. I already mentioned the Exchange Online PowerShell commandlets. You can also do this from a Power BI PowerShell commandlet perspective. Depending on how you're looking at getting this data, the retention of that data or what you can extract from that varies depending on the source. So what I want to do is just focus in on the actual Power BI PowerShell commandlets. So let me jump into my actual machine here real quick. And I will show you, I'm already signed in using those PowerShell commandlets. And what I can do is I can call the get Power BI activity event. And what this will do is actually extract that information. I can give it a start and an end range. This has to be within the same day period, but the actual storage of the data goes back 30 days. And then I can also give it activity types of what I want to pull in. By default, if I don't include activity type, it'll give me everything. And you may have to loop through depending on how much data is actually there. The awesome thing about using the Power BI activity event PowerShell commandlet from the Power BI PowerShell commandlets are that as long as you're a Power BI administrator, you can go get this information. So you don't have to be a global admin for your tenant. You don't have to go ask your central IT team for access to this information. It should just work, and it only gives you the Power BI information, which is great. So let me go ahead and run this. And then we'll see that this will be the view report activities that come back for the given time range that I specified. And we can see here that we got the view report, and we can see different information about it. Also, if you did have those security labels defined, that information would be listed here as well if it was actually there. All right, let's jump back in. So audit logs and activity logs, these are a key factor for understanding usage inside of your report or inside of your tenant. And I would also recommend that if you are not capturing this information and archiving this data, you should absolutely be doing that 100% in terms of looking back historically, because I said that these are sliding windows for the given data retention. At most, you're going to get 60 to 90 days back if you're going through the Office 365 management APIs, and only 30 days if you're going through the Power BI PowerShell commandlets. And so if you want information beyond that point in time, you're going to have to go capture that information and make sure you're archiving it somewhere, whether that's in an Azure SQL database or some other data source. So I definitely recommend you look at that if you're not doing that already. So that's where we are today. And I've already called out some of the challenges with this, right? So it's hard to figure out a holistic look of what is actually going on. So if there's performance issues, if we have the need to see what that adoption is, if we have the need to understand who's accessing what, it's hard, right? So there's limited metrics that are available in the service. Depending on the area that you're looking at inside of Power BI, it varies. Also, I mentioned the sliding windows already, right? So there's no long-term storage for any of this. The other thing is that from a workspace perspective, the actual workspace admins, right now, it's almost impossible for them to actually go look at this information. So this is either tied to the Power BI admins and or the Office 365 global admins all up. And so at an actual individual workspace area, this is a challenge. And then the other thing that you have to do is you've got to go figure it out using different tools, right? So there's no like holistic way to go get this information, whether that's writing your own PowerShell scripts across different PowerShell inputs, whether that is understanding where to go output that data to, and then you got to write all this ETL to get that data formatted. And then correlating that information across the different sources that you're pulling is really hard, or in some cases impossible. And then performance tuning in general is just difficult and time consuming. So where are we going with this? And where is Power BI going to help you in this stance? And what I want to introduce to you is Azure Monitor. And so Azure Monitor is a service in the Azure world itself. It's a complete software as a service solution for collecting and analyzing that information based on telemetry from an application of some kind or another service. The nice thing about Azure Monitor is it allows multiple storage destinations, and you can configure those retention periods. So if you want to have it for 2-3 years worth of data, go for it. The other thing that's really cool, this uses Kusto under the hoods. There's like about a 5-minute latency in terms of when it actually lands from the moment that Power BI will generate the event to when it will actually land and be queryable from a Kusto perspective, and or a native Power BI connector inside of Power BI desktop. So the latency on this is it's not what I would say is real time, but it's very near real time and much closer to anything else that we have today. Now with this Azure Monitor and Azure Log Analytics, it is a separate cost to actually maintain those items. But I would also argue that no matter how you're retaining this information, even if you're grabbing it out of the Office 365 management APIs, you have to store it somewhere. whether that's in a database or storage account, and you're going to have to pay for those items. But from an Azure Monitor and log analytics perspective, from a cost perspective, it is pretty effective for what it's doing. The other thing I would say is that Power BI service as a whole uses this implementation under the hoods for the backend pieces that we look at. And so we're using it at scale for millions of users. So we know that this works. And so we're confident that this will work for you as well. So to give you just a little high level concept of this. So from this case, we'll think of Power BI as that Azure platform service, and then we will dump that information into the logs aspects of Azure Monitor. And then we can use log analytics on top of that to query those items. And then from there, you can pull it in from either Power BI desktop or anything that you have. Maybe you have a third-party holistic monitoring system that hooks into log analytics. It can just go extract and incorporate that data. Or if you have your own built-in product within inside of your organization, you can build into that as well. All right, so what are we going to do here? So there are a couple different milestones that are a part of this. And so the public preview of this will be in the October-November 2020 timeframe, and there will be different aspects of this. So if you see AS Engine here, think Power BI dataset and datasets within inside of the Power BI service. So Azure Analysis Services already has this implementation and allows you to dump information into log analytics. And so this will be a very similar approach on the Power BI side. And then as we go forward over time, more and more items will be added into this data storage. The vision for this is that all of the metrics of Power BI will be available from this particular storage mechanism in hooking into Azure Monitor. And so you'll see here that we start with this AS Engine or the Power BI dataset trace information, and then going all the way through usage metrics, audit information, dataset refresh, gateway logs, so on and so forth. So can't talk about specific dates for each one of these items. It's still in the planning phases, but just know that public preview for the AS Engine or Power BI dataset items are going to be slated. Public preview will be in October or November of this calendar year, 2020. One question we've heard is this going to be a Power BI Premium only item? And the answer is that initially it will be yes with the public preview, but the goal is to also allow this to be used outside of Power BI Premium as well. So if you just have a regular workspace, then that information can be collected as well. So the initial start of it will be for premium only workspaces, and then it hopefully will be exposed beyond that piece. Another question that we've heard are, what are the permissions that you need for doing this? Do you have to actually go to your Office 365 or your Azure administrator? And the answer there is going to be maybe. So what's going to happen is you're going to tie this to an actual Azure subscription. So if you don't actually have access to that Azure subscription to create the Azure Monitor workspace or the Azure Log Analytics workspace, then you're going to have to go work with them to get that implemented. But as long as you're a Power BI admin itself, you'll be able to configure this from a tenant perspective, assuming that Azure subscription is already configured with the workspace for log analytics. And we'll circle back a little bit on that. I've got a walkthrough that we'll go through to show you what this will look like. So first off, dataset events. This was the AS Engine. So this will be more like what we can do in Azure Analysis Services, or if you're doing like a profiler trace inside of SQL Server Analysis Services today. Those are the type of events that will be available in the initial public preview. So you'll be able to send all those engine events to log analytics, both from a tenant perspective and a workspace level, if the workspace admin has enabled this. And then there'll be some fix-ups on names and data types to make it more usable from a log analytics perspective than what you can do today with like Azure Analysis Services. So this is the first milestone that will come out, and it will just be improved upon as we go forward. So as a Power BI admin, assuming that that workspace, the log analytics workspace, has already been created inside of the Azure portal, the Power BI admin will go to the admin portal, go to Azure Connections, and then you'll have different options. So today we already have tenant level storage and workspace level storage for like a bring your own storage concept. For the bring your own log analytics concept, we're also going to add in these items for both a tenant level and a workspace level permission set. And so you will go into the tenant level log analytics piece. You'll select your subscription, your resource group, your log analytics workspace, and then go ahead and save that. and then it will be configured for the tenant and start capturing that information. That's really all you have to do. And then if you want to further enable this for workspace, then what you can do is inside of the workspace level log analytics permission, there's just a checkbox there to enable it. And then a workspace admin can actually go into the settings of the workspace, go to the Azure Connections tab, and then enable that log analytics. And this could be to a different log analytics workspace that maybe they have. And that won't override the tenant piece. So both could be going at the same time and dumping that information. So now you can empower your workspace admins to also collect given information. And eventually, once the usage metrics and audit information is in there, as well as gateway logs, things of that nature, it'll all be in a central place for them to go look at and analyze what's happening in their workspace. All right, so once all this data is there with inside of Azure Monitor or Log Analytics, you can just go to the Azure portal. That is an option for you to actually query this information. It's using the Kusto query language. And so that's available for you directly in the Azure portal. The other thing you can do is just connect directly inside a Power BI desktop to Azure Data Explorer. It says Kusto in parameters, and then, or in parentheses. And then from there, you can apply, your query to Kusto itself if you want. And then you can build out your reports that give you those insights. This is probably the thing I'm most excited about from an administration perspective and gaining insights into the Power BI service itself. As this goes forward, like I said, the audit log information, the usage metrics, gateway information, refresh information, the goal there is that all of the metrics for Power BI will be in this central location. And then you're now in control of the retention of this. And also you don't have to worry about the headache of doing that data movement piece, which was honestly just talking to a bunch of enterprise customers. That's painful right now in terms of orchestrating all of that data movement. Now you can just let Power BI dump it into the log analytics workspace and you're good to go. Then you can just report on it, decide how much information you want to keep, and then move forward with understanding usage inside of Power BI. The last thing I want to touch on are just some other enhancements coming to Power BI from an administration perspective, just to be aware of these items. The first item coming up are going to be service tags. So service tags are just listed inside of the Azure IP list that you can download. This is just a JSON file. And there's going to be a Power BI tag on given items that you can just go for firewall filtering, easy firewall filtering on Power BI related endpoints, as opposed to the entire IP list for a data region. So this just helps to reduce the amount of exposure from a firewall perspective. So you're not opening it up to everything, just the Power BI endpoints that are there. This list gets updated weekly, so you'll have to have some sort of automation in place to handle that accordingly. Private link is another item that's coming. Details are still forthcoming, but it will be out very shortly. And this allows you to have inbound traffic from a given network perspective, so you can isolate that traffic. And then this will also allow you to block external traffic from hitting Power BI. So for an organization, what this means is that if you're funneling it through your own network, whether that's your on-premises network and going through from an Azure networking perspective, your end users, if they wanted to hit that, would have to go through some sort of VPN to get through your network path, as opposed to just hitting it on the public internet. And so again, this helps to reduce exposure from a public internet perspective to potentially sensitive data. And then the last item that's here is VNet integration. And so VNet integration, virtual networking injection, is going to allow you to assign a premium capacity to a given VNet defined in Azure, and then allow you to do data refresh across that VNet injection. So this means, for example, if you have something like Azure Synapse Analytics, today, if you had that with inside of a VNet, you'd have to have a gateway in place to do that data refresh or using direct query. With VNet injection, the goal is that you wouldn't actually need to install a gateway or have that sitting in a VM in that VNet, because the premium node could just talk through that VNet to the given data source, which is amazing. I know we only had a short time together, but I do hope that this information at least gives you the overall picture of where Power BI is going from a direction perspective and what is coming for administrators to help them gain insights into their organization, both from a usage perspective and from a performance perspective. There are some great stuff that will be coming over the next couple months and also into the next calendar year. I'll also recommend you definitely check out the Power BI release plan and release wave information to keep tabs on what those roadmap items are and the timelines associated with them. Stay tuned to the Power BI blog as well for announcements when those items become available to you. Thank you so much for attending the session and for engaging in the Ignite conference.